Delicate subject. Chapter 7. Garrus was busy with coordination with Palaven, which is why their destination was the Citadel. Garrus was going to meet his father on neutral ground. The Normandy was not approved for docking near Palaven, and might never be. Garrus had been pulling in every favor, bit of gossip, and heads-up he could get, scrambling to reconfirm his identity, and that he wasn't dead, or a traitor. Turians slept a great deal less than humans, but he'd been pushing that limit, only sleeping in a cot in the battery for the 1 or 2 hours he allowed himself a day. They were 2 days out, and his prep was exhaustive. She'd stopped in to see him, and he pulled her into a long kiss, then stretched and cracked his neck with an imposing and distinct sound. She smiled, tilted her head, and said, "Can I get you anything? Everything going okay?" He shook his head negatively to the question of needing anything, but said, "I'm okay. Spirits, but you smell good, Karim. Save some time for me in 3 days. I won't take no for an answer." She grinned. "And you won't hear it." He groaned, and then said with weary focus as he stretched out his arms and rotated his shoulders, "Good, because otherwise there'd be a makeshift gag involved. Wouldn't let you up until I heard a muffled yes, anyway." And now I have to wait for that?" He laughed, and his shoulders relaxed momentarily, then tensed again, and he was back to business. "I'm okay. Tired. I've gotten some sleep here and there. Miss you like hell, but this is important. I'm actually hopeful. I'm hopeful. Terrified, but hopeful." "Good. So it sounds like a good day. For us, anyway. Thank you for doing this." He nodded, and she asked, "How's Tally doing?" She's shattered. Could have been so much worse. I'm glad she's among friends and not back on that poison trap ship. I wouldn't have minded murdering a few Quarians while I was there." She nodded in vehement agreement. "Did you guys get more closely involved? Seems like you had some moments there." "I comforted her, or tried to. She's got no facial expressions or scent, and I'm a Taurian. If she doesn't slip me a note or something, I'm never going to do anything. It's up to her." "Have you ever been with a Quarian?" He shook his head. "No. Scares the crap out of me." "Yeah, me too. So, back to terrified but hopeful?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Not like I can do anything about it right now. I don't want to use her grief as an entry point. Seems like an incredibly poor starting point for a relationship." She smiled. "You want me to talk to her?" He thought a moment. "Might help. Couldn't really hurt. You have a way with words. At least I'd know. You can explain that as a Taurian, I am culturally obliged to be a moron where such things are concerned. It's easier with Turian women." He smiled at some internal memory. "They are not shy." She grinned. "Mind if I tell her that you asked me if it was okay if you pursued her when I propositioned you?" She'd melt into an embarrassed puddle. Wish I could see it. "Sure. You have more latitude to be, informed and direct." "Might help her to know." "Thanks. I haven't had much spare time to consider it with everything else going on." You okay? I'm good. Thrilled to see Thane is gonna be okay. He smiled, and he relaxed as he looked at her with warmth. Yeah, someone should thank you for that. He closed his eyes. 3 days. That's what I keep telling myself. She leaned up on tiptoes and kissed the side of his mandible, saying, 3 days. Gag unnecessary, but optional, if that's what you're into. He pulled her into a dizzying kiss, then reluctantly let her go, both back to business with expressive and shared heavy sighs. She checked in on Tally, asking her about the aftermath of her ordeal, and Tally put a brave mask on it. Jane relied mostly on listening to Tally's very expressive voice and accented body language, an adaptation she imagined Quarians had developed with the loss of facial expressions. As much as Garrus might say he was clueless, what he really was involved being a Taurian with deep inhibitions that required he hide personal feelings and cultural discrepancies when compared to other species. Jane had seen Tally slump over when Garrus talked. Tally had a big old crush and a lot of anxiety. Jane asked her, I'd like to talk to you about something privately, and this isn't really a good place. Would you mind coming up to my cabin? I promise it isn't a bad thing. Tally hesitated, and Shepard could still hear the anxiety. Sure, Shepard. Let me just close out this set of figures. Then we can go. They headed up in silence, and Jane could almost smell the smoke from Tally's brain spinning with no traction. Well, to be fair, there was smoke. Was the smoke purple, or just the face shield? Hard to tell. If Jane tried to reassure Tally any more, she'd just make her more nervous, so she brought her in and said, This cabin's much nicer than the one on the original Normandy. Tally sat down on the couch, admired the fish, and Jane barreled on ahead. First, I have issues with the substandard berths available on the Normandy. I have this nice cabin. Other people, not so much. Do you think you can do anything to shuffle some mass around on the ship and get people actual, decent berthing? Private cabins, private bathrooms? As though people could choose to live here and weren't just squatting in cramped misery? People here are giving their all. Those bunks on the crew deck are depressing. Also, do you have any ideas to make the galley more dextro-friendly? Absolutely, we could do that. There's definitely unutilized space for berthing. You could make it more dextro-friendly by stocking a few more things that weren't nutrient-paced. The disgust she poured into those words was eloquent. Good. Get me a list on the food, and give me a basic dextro tutorial when you get the chance. After the main mission, I'm planning on keeping the ship, setting up as a Reaper eradication force, hoping to coordinate with different species who will all need our help. Garrus is working on coordination with the hierarchy, and I'll work on the alliance. Maybe you could work out something with Quarians? I'm going to ask certain people to stay on. This is me asking you to stay. I'd like to bribe people if possible with decent quarters and better food, and to stop feeling guilty. Full overhaul, time at dock for refit guaranteed. You won't be stuck dragging furniture, and you won't have to do it alone. We won't do it until after the mission, but you can plan in the meantime? I hadn't thought beyond. Calling something a suicide mission kind of puts a period at the end of that sentence, doesn't it? Yeah, I opted for honesty when maybe I should have called it something less grim. Vacation mission? The definitely not dead mission. In your face at the collector base. I can't top that. Well, at least suicide was not soft sell. The flotilla has treated you like absolute crap. But I know you love your people. I know you wanted to kill them, but you wouldn't let me blow up the Alliance on your behalf, so fair is fair. Yeah, fair is fair. We all have crappy in-laws. This next thing is personal, not professional, so tell me it's none of my business if it's none of my business, but it's possible it may be at least partly my business, or you might think it is. You lost me. We have established that I'm bad at naming things. Are you romantically interested in Garrus? Why are you asking me? Because, frankly, Garrus can't. He's a Turian, and in his culture, women have to make the first move. Hey, what? I didn't... How... Why didn't anybody tell me? Jane put her hands up. This is why I am telling you. He can't. He asked you to tell me? No, he couldn't even ask me to tell you. I had to ask him if he wanted me to ask you to... Oh, hell, I've lost count of reps. I have a feeling you are romantically interested in him. I know he is romantically interested in you. What? How? Does he talk about me? She sounded like she hated herself for being curious, but she'd also hate Jane if she didn't give her every detail. I saw you when he quoted from Fleet and Flotilla. And it was your idea in the first place. When I told him I was interested in him, he accepted my invitation and my terms. He had been unable to do anything but hint before I asked him. This is why I'm here. You might think he's exclusively mine, but he isn't. You might think if he wanted you, he'd tell you, but he can't. So I'm just trying to straighten out any misunderstanding and give you back an opportunity that belongs to you. I also asked him if I could tell you that when I told him I was polyamorous and propositioned him, he asked me how I'd feel if he pursued you. I said it would be fine. What? I wish I had a bug in that room to hear that conversation. He loves you. He might be romantically interested in me, but he loves you. I can see that. Everyone can see that, even on the SR1. What you have together is special, unique. Yes, he does love me. That doesn't mean that he doesn't love you too. Have something special and unique with you? Well, yes, according to many people, it does. It should only be according to us. Yes, he loves me, and he loves Thane. It doesn't have to be a choice where we choose one over the other. We could be equals. Tally was statue still, frozen in body language of shock. Maybe nobody had told her. It seemed everyone knew about her involvement with Thane and with Garrus and liked it together, but nobody had stuck their nose into their relationship with each other yet, chalking it up as a friendship. Isn't that sweet? It was almost refreshing. Unless Tally was just being faux shocked. She wasn't going to accuse Tally of that. This is a lot to take in. Jane waved a hand. Yes, it is. I don't really know much about Quarian attitudes regarding sex and love, or yours, personally. I've been involved with Turians before, and Drell. I know the culture's a bit more. I've never been involved with a Vakarian, though, and neither has Garrus. His attitude is consistent with his culture. I've developed my own attitude, so I'm not particularly a typical human. I think I figured that part out for myself, Commander Obvious. Well, I love you both. I'd love to see you happy. I'd hate to be perceived as an obstacle. I'd feel guilty if I knew how you felt, and knew how he felt, knew under the circumstances you'd never tell each other, unless I did something. So, you and he would still be involved. And you love me? Am I missing another proposition here? Unless he changed his mind and told me we were through, yes, we would remain involved indefinitely. Not bonded, not married, but involved when and where, and if we can make the time. I don't own him. He's free to follow his own happiness, and if that happiness is with you or without me, that's his decision. I should warn you not to ask him to choose. That isn't for my benefit, but yours. If he chooses you, and circumstances change, that's fine with me, and I wish you both well, all the joy you can catch in your hands. But asking him to choose would be deal-breaker territory. Well, you'd lose his respect. I can't promise him forever, but I can promise him I want him to be happy. I can promise you that I want you to be happy. I am not propositioning you, but I am also not propositioning you or intentionally excluding you. You haven't expressed attraction to me, and I haven't expressed it to you, and doesn't it seem that there's enough going on right now? Would I have to sleep with everyone? Together? What? No, that's not the price of admission. You and Garrus work out what you want together. Yikes. Thane terrifies me. Jane smiled, and she thought of his dark voice, bands of mystical cloth, saying, "Yeah, me too." Tally, what do you want? A drink. Jane held up a finger. Garrus keeps a stash here. That I can do. She gave Tally a moment while she took her time getting some alcohol. She set down the bottles and glasses in a Vakarian-friendly sterilizing carafe, saying, "Here's your chance to exercise your curiosity, Tally. Ask me anything. If I can't tell you, I won't. If I can, I will. Shoot. You're damned brave, by the way." I don't feel brave. That's why it's bravery. It's a paradox. She downed a shot and cleared her immediate schedule. Tally took a few sips, organized her thoughts. Okay, in order. I will help with the refit of the Normandy. I would appreciate private quarters. Thank you for thinking of us. I'd like to get through the, definitely not dead mission before I make any major decisions about staying or going. The flotilla is a mess. Not sure I can help, but they definitely need help. If I go, though, I'll look for opportunities to work with you, to build trust. Might be better if I were your inside woman. Inside Vakarian. I'll be your inside Vakarian, Shepard. Please, call me Jane. Tally took another sip, warming to her subject and the soapbox. I'll be your inside Vakarian, Jane. Wait, that sounded just a little bit dirty. I'm okay with it. You're okay with it. All right. As for the rest, well, Quarians don't really do casual. It's not an insult or judgment to what you do. It's a practical thing. Even between a Quarian and another Quarian, there's always a risk of infection. Having sex is taking a real chance that you'll die as a result. If it helps, we're not doing casual either. This is love, Tally, not sex. I mean, there's sex, but, well, it's not just sex. But that risk you'd be taking is why I'm saying you're brave for even considering it and listening to me without just slapping me and walking out. You'd let me slap you? Don't tease me, Tally. Keep going. Risk. This is a huge risk. I can just hear it now. My big come-on line. Hey, Garrus, wanted to get sterilized? Jane almost snorted vodka through her nose. I don't know, Tally. Garrus is pretty creative. You could have fun in decontamination. Plus, we actually have a decontamination unit. We could just put in a few throw pillows. Tally almost knocked her drink over. I am not sure I feel better or worse about your assurance that Garrus is creative. Jane turned and looked at her, making as much simulated eye contact as she could. Better. You should feel better. If I'm gonna be Garrus's wingman person, I am not overselling him. I get those I could die right now and be happy feelings. Of course, they're not literal for me. He's worth risk, and comfortable with risk, and accommodating. This is weird. Yeah, you should be used to that by now. You've got to be kidding me that there's even a possibility he'd leave you for me. You know that wouldn't happen. But if it did, you'd be okay with it? How does that work? Well, Turians are different from humans. Turians aren't considered adults until they bond, so Garrus will always be a child among his people until he chooses one mate. It's built into their social structure. I can't give that to him, and on top of that, I'm human. I've asked him to rejoin Turian society, and as a social child, that will be difficult. If he's involved with a human, that's a massive risk, possibly losing his clan right when we need them to fight Reapers. There are reasons, really good reasons, why he and I will have a rough road. He says he's accustomed to rough, happy to take it on, but at least for me. I'll always be willing to let him take the easier path if that's what he chooses. I know he wouldn't ask me to give up my command to be with him. Can I ask him to give up his Turian identity? Granted, he'd already given it up, and he says he's fine, but I could hope for better for him. I've been smacked down on the subject, so I won't bring it up to him again, but what if he does change? Say we live. He has years and years to consider a life in the hierarchy. He meets someone he can bond with, and I'm still kicking around on this ship, permanent, military, constantly in danger. He's done his service, and he left the military when his term was up. I never considered leaving once. I'm given another chance at life, and all I want to do is get it done. I dove straight back in. But he could have a real bed, a real home, kids, respect, status. So the monogamy thing has rewards, potentially, for him. It's a genetic destiny. Rewards I can't offer. Monogamy is full of pitfalls, and it doesn't always work for humans, but for Turians, it's a lock. There's no reason for me to consider marriage. I won't have kids, I don't care about status, and I have no ambitions socially. I could be gone on a mission, or killed, or critically injured at any time, and it's my job to be prepared for that. It's not just about me dying and being unavailable unpredictably. I think about someone marrying me and being burdened with my broken body or mind in a veteran hospital somewhere. The odds are high that I'll end up there. I'm more willing to end up alone than I am to cause that sort of grief. I can't ask anybody to take time they might spend living and instead be chained to my graveside or bedside. Or take this whole squad thing we've got going. I could go by myself, and I'm skilled and competent, and that's all lovely, but I'm limited on my own. So I bring someone else who is skilled and competent in different ways, and we work together, and it's better. And I bring someone else along who is skilled and competent in even further different ways, and we have a much better shot at surviving. So it's like putting a squad together. I need certain things. I have weaknesses and strengths, and I have to pick people who are gonna work well with that, you know? You realize you just compared sex to killing people? Well, maybe I'm not the best at analogies. This part of my life right now is weird. I mean, it's all weird, but I've been always with the Alliance, and there's no no sex. So, I'm a dutiful sort of person, but in my free time, I could do what I wanted. I got used to it. Different people, different places, and I could see them when I was there, and then I didn't see them. They didn't wait. They didn't worry. I didn't cause them mental anguish through my absence. Or I did. And I didn't mean to. And they weren't a good fit. I just tried to make them happy when I was there. I was in love with a Drell. He was lovely. While we were on the SR-1 and a bit before. He died during the attack on the Citadel. It was the best relationship I'd ever had, and he understood me. He taught me I could be loved for who I was. Now, I won't settle for anything less. I'd like to pass that gift on. It's his legacy, in a way. That's how I could let Garrus go toward his own happiness, you, or whatever it is, in a future we can't see. Jane, I'm so sorry. Thank you. This is the first time I've been on the same ship with and had my back watched by people I love. And I don't want to go without it. But I could. I will do my job no matter what. It doesn't suck to be loved, Tally. My job is perfect for this. I already have to ask people to do crazy shit and make it work on sheer will and talent. If I'm gonna die, if I've already died, if I've already survived the death of a dearest love, if I can handle that, why not ask for what I want? Can't get it if I don't ask. Why don't you ask for what you want? I mean, I'm happy to sit here and get drunk with you when you want some company, but what about throw pillows, Tally? Throw pillows. What if it works? What if it's amazing? Take it from me. It might spoil the hell out of you. But you won't regret it for a moment. You might have something, and then have nothing, but otherwise you'll have nothing all along. If you don't try, you'll never know what you're missing, but you'll probably know you're missing something. And that's sad. It's about freedom. And as long as I have that, I've discovered that I can give it to others, create love in each moment. I know that ideally people want love to be like a sun that shines forever in one spot, reliably, but for me it's a series of building fires in the night. It's usually dark where I am, and I can't chase the sun. You know, Jane, I may not exactly understand, but when you get drunk, you're a little poetic. prosaic. I'm prosaic. And slightly slurry. Thank you, my slightly slurry friend. You are welcome. I know you've got that whole risk of literally dying thing going on, too. You don't want to have sex, young lady. You just don't have sex. You are loved. We will be there for you. Thank you. This is weird, but it's good. I was in love once, but I had to go on my pilgrimage. We were so close in age that he wanted us to go on pilgrimage together, but I said no. I wanted to do it on my own, prove it to my father that I would put duty above family, as he always did. I didn't want to get sick, so I left. And my pilgrimage was a huge success because you found me. I've contributed to the betterment of my people. But I couldn't have done it alone. Genelan died on his pilgrimage. He was studying the Geth just as I was, but he was killed by them. He didn't have you. He didn't have me. I was the lucky one, and I know it was foolish to try alone. I sent him out alone, and I feel I don't even have the right to miss his voice or miss his arms, but I do miss him. I do miss him. I don't know if I have your courage, or crazy, or whatever it is you have. I certainly don't have your immune system. Now you're back, and my father is dead, and my people are afraid and in danger, and I don't want to be sick. I think I convinced myself I hadn't really been in love, but maybe my ambition has clouded my heart. I have a chance at love, but maybe I can't take it for the same reasons. I don't want it to break me. Maybe I'm just like my father. I am so sorry. I don't regret that I found you, but I can see where you regret not having been found together. Was he angry at you before he died? No, he was so proud of me. His last message said he always knew I'd succeed, and that he was hopeful he'd find something of equal value and make me proud of him. She started to cry. He loved you, Tally. You have the right to miss his voice, to miss his arms, and he wouldn't want you to suffer. Take his last words, and don't let feeling like you don't deserve him cloud your heart. Give him what he wanted. Be proud of him. Be proud of yourself. Take his love as offered, imperfect and unfulfilled, but still true. You would never have let him go if you'd known what would happen. That's why you're not like your father. Tally continued to cry, and Jane reached out a hand to her. Tally took it in both of hers and held on tight. You miss his voice. You miss his arms. You could ask Garrus to hold you and talk to you. There's no risk of getting sick there, no failure of duty. I promise you, lovely woman, he would want to do that and would welcome the opportunity. If that's what you want, ask for it. Maybe that's what you can do for each other. Maybe that's the fire you can build, what makes you special and unique together. It can be just as I said, that it is about love and not sex. Thane was most often in the med bay, his treatments intense and painful. He was reportedly a model patient. He refused painkillers, partly because that was who he was, and partly because they had explained that if he did so, they would get better scan results because most painkillers affected the critical systems involved that they were attempting to alter. They had restored a great deal of his function, but it still meant continuing invasive surgery, lack of sleep, constant monitoring, possible rejection, something called graft versus host, which sounded like a video game but was in reality something deadly and terrible. Fortunately, the risk of that was low. Koyat was a very close match, his samples providing the missing pieces and helping them focus on synthesizing therapies. Thane had improved, and at the end of each recovery in a cycle, he was better off. He felt he had regained the majority of his breathing capacity and was able to rebuild new muscle mass, atrophy arrested and reversed. Karen had assured her that she was tailoring therapies to methods he could not alter and did not rely on unobserved compliance. Karen gave him medications and therapies in person, assured he took them. They had both seen him refuse oxygen masks or anything obstructing his vision or voice. Jane privately considered it had at least a small element of vanity, which he certainly had. And it was comforting to know Karen had the same read. Anything he'd be expected to do out of their sight was not guaranteed. In short, he seemed like someone who would pour pills down the sink. After his visit, when he'd worn his tseni, he was unwilling to discuss his health, always saying he was well and quickly changing the subject, redirecting her to her health or sleep or anything else. She would always ask, always accepted the redirection. She visited often, and so did Garrus. In the med bay, she and Thane compromised on not discussing weightier concerns in a public space, and began to read to one another in their own languages, switching on and off their translators and learning a few words. He did not care to convalesce in her company or be comforted. He was accustomed to pain and uncomplaining. That was clear, and he didn't want her sympathy. She could see the strain in his skin, but he never let it reach his eyes in her presence. It was impossible that she wouldn't worry, because that was pretty much her job, and a hobby she'd picked up regarding him. But she could give him not appearing to worry or fuss, and he wouldn't see it in her eyes. He would know that she did it for him. Jane checked in with the rest of the crew. She never brought up the word Cerberus, making it seem as though she'd simply stay on the Normandy and do as they'd been doing. Kelly. She was ambivalent about Kelly. Jane did not offer her a continued position. Ship's counselor was not something she needed. Jane hovered over the pulse of her crew, and Kelly seemed to let her know things she could have picked up from her messages or already knew. If the crew knew to send her an alert, she would be on it. She had nothing against Kelly in particular, she just didn't need her. She was not essential personnel, and she intended to pack the ship with essential. She was cordial with Kelly and checked in, but didn't expound on the future. Joker was enthusiastic about new crew housing. She asked him to check in with Tally and check in with Dr. Shakwas to see if they could provide him with some better cradling support. Maybe something in a nice anti-grav update. If I have the best bed, I'll be fine. You could even stop browsing porn while on the CIC, maybe. Now, that's just crazy talk. And if it says that in a contract, I am not signing. Discussion with Samara was brief, and she deferred until after the mission, saying she would meditate upon the subject. Zaid scoffed and said if they survived, she couldn't afford him. Then he said he'd think about it after getting drunk at the mission after-party. She promised to foot the bill for all the booze, and he smiled and... Damn. Yeah. He winked. Miranda was easy, and Jane wanted her around for her facility with paperwork and her near proximity to Thane's health, not to mention her own. She used the word invaluable. She was also ambivalent about Jacob, though he was a good man and an excellent crewmate. She just couldn't read him as well because there wasn't that much to read. He had too much distance from the rest of the crew, who had developed more interpersonal relationships with each other. He stuck out a bit like a stiff thumb. She still offered him a continued position, and he said he would think about it. Morden had 15 projects he had considered, but he liked his lab work up and said if possible, he would use the Normandy as a base of operations, and of course, monitor Thane. He discussed at least 8 of the 15 projects, and she promised some lab upgrades, having no idea what that would entail. Kasumi stared at her for a moment. So, you want more than the ample opportunities I've given you to get me killed? Jane nodded solemnly. All right. I'm going to get private quarters put in. I have great need of a spymaster. There will be a room with your name on it. I can even put spymaster up on it in some sort of tasteful glitter. I need you, Kasumi. We're going to need to know everything about everyone. I'm hoping you can coordinate with Liara. The Normandy will be a great place to, store things and not need pesky identification to get on. Thanks, Shep. Grant said he wanted to return to Tuchanka, and she fully supported that and told him that if he ever wanted to crack some more glass with his head, either don't do it here or bring a paycheck. He laughed. She loved that guy. Rex was going to be in trouble. Rex liked trouble. Karen Shakwa smiled. Of course, I'll stay. Jack said, I don't know. I kind of like the loud, gloomy horror down here. I'm thinking of getting a fog machine. You can visit, but wouldn't you like a lockable door between you and the other freaks on this ship? I don't know. Seems like nobody's coming after me. Why is that? Are you sleeping with all of them? Just 2. Just 2, she says. Yeah, I might want something with a light switch for once. I'm considering becoming a genuine citizen. You're a bad influence. Three days came and went. 4 days came and went without an update from Garrus since he disembarked. That could be good or bad. Jane stayed on the ship, not wanting to get dragged into a meeting face to nose with a Taurian. Tally had given her a rundown on how to make the galley more dextro-friendly, had ideas about berthing, and Jane was talking to Liara and Alliance contacts, trying to figure out some good things to do before they headed through the relay. Karen had sedated Thane earlier in the evening to give him some rest, finally, after a grueling course of therapies and subsequent tests. Their scans and readings were complete for this cycle, and Karen had judged that he was in too much pain to sleep, which Jane could have told from the pallor and texture of his skin. It was waxy and dull, as though it would peel or crack if touched. She brushed his sleeping forehead with her lips, his temperature elevated, only somewhat reassured when Karen said it was due to stress and not infection. She put her hand on his chest to feel his sleep hum, unlabored and clear, hoping it was all worth it. She worried about the social and political pain she had tossed Garrus into. She worried about the searing suffering that Thane was going through. She retired to her cabin with serious thoughts and worked on her evening rituals of data pads and research, triple-checking of more and more variables. She fell asleep late and exhausted right after she saw the figures start to blur into each other. She woke up screaming. Well, more like shouting. More like being tackled by a Taurian. Exactly like being tackled by a Taurian. It took her a few seconds to orient. He was huge and sudden. She reacted by flailing her arms and swatting at him. He had shoved her onto her back, his mouth at her throat. She was staked in by unyielding plates, and he lazily grabbed her arms without looking and had them pinned over her head when it seemed like she was about to attempt better aim. You're like a Varan puppet. If you want me to hit you, all you have to do is ask. It growled against her skin. Later. We should spar. Later. I can't wait to see you try to hit me. Your aim is terrible. I was asleep. He bit at her collarbone. And now you're not. When we spar, Karim, I want to have you pinned to the floor in about 4 seconds. You'd better put down mats. I want your head to spin, but not from a concussion. She relaxed and shifted her hips against his. Whatever you say. He was naked, the hard roll of his cock against her stomach. He was arched over her, and the lines of his shoulders and cowl blocked out the background light. Oh, spirits, yes. I'm gonna want to hear that again. I've missed you, Karim. There's so much I want to hear. He took her flimsy sleep shirt over her breast between his teeth, pulled and twisted back until he had a ragged hole. His tongue slid along the edges of the fabric, on her breast, teeth on her nipple, and he lifted her by the waist and let go of her hands, dragging talons down over the rest of the fabric on the other side from neck to thigh until shorts and shirt fell away in shreds from the brush of his hands and talons over her skin. She let out a rush of air at the grip of his hand around her waist, and then a whimper. She moved her hands, one on the sensitive deeper lines of hide at his waist and one behind his fringe, and he let out a shivering growl that moved through her body. His mandibles flexed wide once and then drew back tight for a moment before relaxing. His jaw and throat worked with a hard swallow. There are so many things I want to do, Karim. All the things I couldn't do that occurred to me in these last endless days. I don't want to be careful. And I don't want to be patient. And I don't really care that you're human and your body can't take it. In fact, I really like the idea of you begging me to stop. I hope you're in some pain tomorrow because you get this little twitch and a smirk on your face like every second was worth it to you. I want you to think about me like I've been thinking about you. I want to hear you say my name when your voice is broken and you can barely move. Tell me I can have that. Tell me whatever you say, Garrus. His talons were digging into the skin of her waist, around her breast, his teeth bared. Whatever you say, Garrus. Her bones had melted while he was talking, and what was left resembled rippling chaos. He blinked slowly, and his eyes went dark and hooded with his smooth and civilized voice gone. He leaned in to kiss her, driving her back into the bed, shifting his legs until he was straddling her upper chest, outsides of her breasts up against the insides of his thighs. He removed her hands from his body with his own, put them on his cock as he sat up, staring down at her, lifting her head with his hand gripped in her hair. He shifted his legs and raised her head until the tip of his cock touched her lips. Keep your eyes open, Karim. Look at me. I want to see your tongue and your lips and feel those impossible fingers. He watched as her hands twisted on him, as she brushed her lips and the tip of her tongue over the head of his cock, her hands and tongue going numb quickly, tasting like tea and gliding heat. He closed his eyes and a shudder went through him, his hand in her hair opening to cradle her neck, talon points digging in, touching all of her skin that he could. He opened his eyes. I can never remember how beautiful you are. She smiled, and he trembled, and Rever took them both. She loved his quick-moving features and mind the way he threatened and collapsed and promised and delivered. She wanted to give him every moment he wanted to see, eyes and warm, dark bronze hands on blue, pink tongue and reddening lips. He was always calm and steady at work, silent and patient and accepting. With that need for control stripped away, his moods changed as fast as her hands could feel change moving over his body, cold and sharp, warm and sensitive, unyielding and then giving way. He could be inconsistent, fluid, spontaneous, and free. She saw gratitude flooding and relaxing his body, his mind, as he moved her where he wanted her, and she melted for him, gave in, chose the path of helplessness and hoarseness because he wanted to see her there. She was always hard and determined and demanding at work, and he let her be soft and hidden and receptive. He was untempered, half please and half demand in waves that burned off and renewed themselves. He transformed as she watched, his shoulders straightening and his eyes moving from satisfied, dreamy, to more intent. He used a hand to slowly gather scent and drag his marking talons down the sides of her body, using the flat sides to spread wide trails. That he shared that with her always surprised her, made her feel like a primal embodiment of femininity. She was small, soft, adored, and mated. His talons pulled back into his hand as she watched, fascinated, and he slipped his hand behind him, between her legs, stroking and watching her face. His sliding, caressing fingers slowly drew more moans from her mouth and flutters from her eyelids. She faltered in her strokes, trying harder and harder to keep her eyes open. He watched her struggle, warm growl building in him. With sweat and slick and tremble in her, he said, "Let go, Corinne." His supporting hand on her neck fell back, and she arched back with it, her eyes closing and her hands moving to scratch down his thigh plates. She was so close, very close, that heated rise of inevitability making her hips arch into his hand. He stopped and smiled down at her. "You're evil." He took it as a compliment, clearly. It probably was. He put his hands down on either side of her chest and lifted his body off hers, extending back and straightening until he was balancing his body parallel over hers, suspended. He bent his elbows further and kissed her, held up, motionless. She wasn't shallow, she thought. It was okay that he was unbearably attractive, in part because he was so strong. She appreciated effort. "You are such a show-off." He took that as a compliment, too. "I like the reactions I get from you." He smiled against her mouth. You're impressed. Admit it. Hell yeah, I'm impressed. He pushed off in a sudden backward motion and straightened, standing up on the floor. He reached down and pulled her by the feet until her hips were at the edge of the bed, her legs over his shoulders as he was kneeling. His mouth lowered to her clit and stroked. One hand scratched along the inside of her thigh, and one hand moved his fingers, pushing his fingers inside her until they were wet. He lifted her hips and twisted the wet tip of his tongue on her ass, then entered with his finger, getting a squeal and a lurch from her hips. He held her down and growled, licked up and in, then slid a finger there, and then went back to her clit with his tongue. The backs of her eyelids flashed, frantic white-hot with red streaks. He gave her no rhythm, no build, no sense of anything but tasting and touching and growling. He'd build her up and then wander off, kissing her thigh, biting at her hip, and she almost did beg him to stop. Pulled out on a rack of stretched and aching pleasure pain with no relief. He ignored pleas and whimpers and groans of frustration. He kept her sweating and panting and begging, then gritting her teeth to keep the words from escaping. Sounds escaping anyway, no matter what she did. Her clit went numb from his tongue, but each rasping pass still brought out deeper strokes of pleasure that involved her spine and a drag of pain on oversensitized depths. Breakthrough shards of intense pleasure cut through the chaos, and her body insisted, now. Yes, now, and no matter what he did or stopped or changed, it was perfect and too late to stop, and she was grateful for the internal mercy that forced an end to the impossible tension. He removed his hands, mouth rolled her over and stood up, bringing her hips with him with her body slanted at a steep angle. He supported her stomach with one hand and scratched the other hand from her shoulders and down, digging in painfully, pressing his cock into her ass with a growl that built to a roar and a moan from her that built to a scream. She barely registered any pain compared to the rioting of everything else that caused pleasure. Here he was slow and careful and patient, the higher rise of reverie causing her to clench her fists in the blankets, rock on her elbows, and squeeze against his cock until she wrested more harsh groans from him. He slid the hand on her stomach back to cup her, his fingers spreading her apart. Palm on her clit and finger just at her entrance. He stopped moving, relying on her rocking back against him, side to side in slow circles. Turian paced. Nowhere but here. Nothing but now. Pleasure. She was drenched in bliss and unable to track time, reached that place she craved of mindlessness, that he would watch over her, that she could trust him. Trust. That thing she couldn't afford with anyone else, couldn't be bought, could only be given. She reveled in trust and pleasure and the miracle of his presence. He withdrew carefully after the passage of bliss measured time, and she realized she was trembling so badly she couldn't move anymore. He shifted her onto her side and was gone for a moment. She said with that cracking, quiet voice he told her he wanted to hear, "Come back, coward." Now who's a Varan puppy? Her eyes were closed as she took in deep breaths. She understood as a warm, wet cloth moved over her body. He moved away briefly, came back and gathered her against him. She was boneless and, as requested, could barely move on her own. He lifted and lowered her onto his lap, inside with a groan. His arms closed around her, and he buried his head at the crook of her neck. He breathed in her scent, tasted her skin, pressed his plates to her shoulder, tightening his arms around her, combing her hair back with his talons starting on her scalp and down. A thought stirred, and she didn't think... She didn't know if... She couldn't think straight, and her strength was gone, but she should. She nuzzled at the side of his throat and drew one of his arms into hers, then stroked along a plate of his finger until he extended a talon. She used it to draw a thin line of blood on his throat, and she looked at it, gathered some on her lips, pressed his mouth into her shoulder until he bit, reverie making it painless and a joyous thing to her as his groan built and trembles worked their way along his limbs. He needed her blood, mingled blood, and she always should remember that, get that for him, not let her mind go until then. She sobered for a moment at her oversight, and then drew his mouth to hers, let him taste, and was rewarded by the sound of his purr. It seemed that he felt the same way she felt when he shared scent, and she was proud and humbled and joyously kissing him. He kissed her back, tongue and teeth and growl, hands in her hair and down her back, cradling her like a pearl in a shell, turning to the side and lying back to hold her, murmuring his words that didn't translate, but that she understood.